So, guys, I want to do a couple of videos about AEW really quick, and I want to talk about like the issue of mostly Simon Miller and what other people are saying about the residency in Philadelphia. Like a lot of people have criticized, like Off the Mic Show has talked about like how you went from 19,000 people at the O2, and then you are going to 900 people at the ECW arena, which is not a good look really, because that's like roughly about I'm just trying to do my Scott Steiner math really quickly, but that's roughly about that's roughly like less than like 5%. That's like roughly less than 5%, really, almost like 20 times less. A little bit more than that. But the thing about it is, I do agree that it's not a good look to kind of keep going to way smaller venues. Like, honestly, they should have done a lot with the show. They should have done a lot of compelling storytelling, and they should have sold out the Leah Curtis Center for the next, they should have booked the Leah Curtis Center for the next 4 or 5 weeks, and maybe have Ring of Honor, Supercard of Honor at the ECW arena, and that's that really. Because the one thing about AEW is that, yeah, I know like there was a certain point where they were renting out big arenas and it wasn't selling that well. They were losing money. So now they're going to smaller venues. And I think they need to get to that point where they're saying, okay, we need to start going to bigger arenas. And that just means we have to start gradually just, going to arenas with like I think right now maybe an 8,000 seat capacity. And then just working hard to make the shows better to hold people, because the problem to hold on to an audience really, because the problem is that if you do something like go to smaller and smaller arenas, you're almost like happy with the fact that yes, you'll save a lot of money really, because you're not going bigger and better, or you're not like losing an audience because there's less people there, but also it's a diminishing return really, because ultimately like you're paying all these big contracts to people. How do you make money by going to a place? Because quite honestly, the average ticket for AEW, I'm gonna like estimate it's around like $150, because there's a lot of like ringside seats or other seats that are a few $100s really. So honestly, in a 900 in like 800 seat in like 1,000 seat venue in Philadelphia where they're getting like 900 people really, they're possibly making roughly around $135,000 a night really. And then also you lose more than half of that because of taxes and business expense. They're probably keeping a third of that. So they're probably making like maybe around like $35,000 if they sell out or something like that. So how much are you going to be happy with that as a profit really? And I also kind of think that another thing is that you always have lesser venues, then it may trigger your audience to be like, okay, we're not going not to bring in a lot of people really, or we're going to just do something where it's going to be smaller and smaller venue, so it's going to turn people away really. Like for example, one of the reasons with TNA wrestling, like they're having Bound for Glory at the Lowell Arena in Massachusetts, and I think that holds like 3,000 people. But you just sold out. No, you had the UBS Arena, which was like 8,000 people. So why can't they find someone like the Boston Garden or another arena, or even like that arena at the at Fenway Park really, where AEW went? Why couldn't they? Why can't they kind of say, okay, that ballroom? Why can't they just do something that's like maybe like a 5,000 or 8,000 seat arena and have a WWE pay for it? Like this thing, it is true in professional wrestling. You have to go bigger and better sometimes. So when you go to small arenas, that's not good. For those two reasons, that it can trick, it's visually not good because you have less people. The next thing is that you're not making as much money, and then also you just tell people, majority of your fan base, not to come really, because there's not a lot of people. Then you get used to less people going to your shows really. I disagree with Simon Miller, because he did say that with professional wrestling, you don't want everything to look the same, really. So, to me, that translates, if you have a WWE event or WWE at an arena and the arenas get like more than 10,000 people, it looks good when you have shows like AEW who go into smaller arenas just so it looks a little different. Like, oh well, ballroom with 1,000 people looks better, looks more different than an arena with like tens of thousands of people. That's a stupid ass argument, and that's a very dangerous argument because that says, hey, you know what, um, accept less, really, accept less. I think that you want to go bigger and better, type of thing, really. And I also think that one of the other dangerous things he says is ultimately, he is not a businessman. He does not work for AEW. He's not an accountant for AEW. So therefore, we should all ignore when they go to these arenas and get less people. Really, like that's the most. And I'll be politically correct. That's a very retard thing to say, really, because with anybody who reviews and is a fan of professional wrestler, even like off the mic show, who was passionate about AEW, or Jim Cornette, who gives constructive criticisms, even though some of it is heavy criticisms, that's like loser talk, really. That's almost like a participation award type of thing, or that's almost like saying, you know what, um, when people can do better, when people can challenge themselves and make a lot of money, really, we should settle for mediocrity, and we should be like, okay, well, we shouldn't care about the business side, or saying nobody should care about the business side because as fans, we're not business people. No, we want our companies to succeed. Really, like I said, League Curse Center, if I'm correct, that holds like maybe 16 to 18,000 people. How good would it be if AEW was selling that out, really, and they had a residency in Philadelphia and they were selling that one out, or they had even the Ring of Honor show in that arena instead of like the ECW arena? Wouldn't that be? Wouldn't you want that, really? 16,000 people, and then like I said about like but making like $30,000 in profit. You're that the League Curse Center is like almost 20 times the size, really. So instead of like maybe like $30,000 in profit, you're probably making like maybe around 6 million, maybe 30,000, maybe like around like 6 million, or a little bit over $1 million, really, because you're selling out all that, really, for like 2 weeks. Wouldn't you want that? Would you want to like make the stories, make the show, make everything compelling, make everything kind of thrilling for that to really happen, really? So, you know, I think the small arenas are a good idea for AEW until they get to a point where they can like start selling out bigger arenas like the 3,000, the 5,000, and the 8,000 seat arenas. But they always have to kind of work on that, building themselves upwards to that level, really. And I think that when you have the smaller arenas, you're for such a long time, or you're so repetitive that it gets to a point where you're almost like saying, you know what, people shouldn't really care about AEW, or people shouldn't really invest in AEW. People shouldn't go on the road and watch AEW unless you're going to the pay per views. And that's going to get a diminishing turn as well, really. So it's like, so it's almost like, as I said, it's ultimately like finding something that's safe, really, and then and not building upwards. If um, and then that's important in life, because if you're in a business, you want to be growing and expanding and trying new things to bring in more people. You don't want to be something like, okay, well, we're losing people, so we feel kind of comfortable in 900 seat arenas or 1,000 seat arenas, and that's our regular television, when we should be like that. When we should get to the point of WWE Raw and SmackDown, we're drawing thousands or tens of thousands of people. So it's I really think that it's really about a diminishing return. What Simon Miller is saying is completely dangerous and other things like that. When he says stuff like, oh, well, if you're a fan, you should not care about how many people watch the show, or how many people are at live attendance, or being like, okay, well, it's a smaller venue, why should I care, really? Because it kind of maybe looks artsy, it looks a little different from what WWE does. So we're going to so let's make that kind of the norm, really. Like, let's just be cool with whatever they have, really. Even if they do something like what they do a show in Delaware, and they go to like the fairgrounds where Combat Zone Wrestling is, and they get like 200 or 300 people, really. Like, you're gonna get to that point, really, and that's not good, really. Sometimes maybe once a year, like when they did the Jericho Rock and Rager and they had the arena on the boat and everything like that. Okay, maybe once a year you want to do something like that because you're going to operate at a loss really by not having that many people, or with the ECW arena, you may just do that for the ROH Death Before Dishonor show because they don't usually draw a lot of people. But but then that's good really, but then that's good and that's safe really. But you just don't like kind of want your regular shows to be like that. I think they need to start working upwards and bringing more people and try to have big arenas to be like, okay, well, now there are consequences if we don't do well with this. We need to do well with this. So I think that ultimately this kind of coddling and this kind of supporting AEW for going to smaller arenas, it is helpful so they don't lose money, but it also gets to a point of saying, okay, now it's good to make sure you're not losing money, but now what are we doing to move ourselves upwards so we can start being, more and more profitable? That's important. And when you have people like Simon Miller just saying, oh, well, I'm not going to care about that, I'm just going to watch as a fan, and everybody should be the same way, that's very problematic because that just teaches a cycle of complacency and also enforcing a diminishing return. Like a business person is always looking to get bigger and better, and that's how you become successful, really. Or being like, okay, now we're in a lull, or now things are not working out. So as they're not working out, well, we need to keep experimenting. We need to keep trying new things to kind of, you know, um, fix our problems. Really, and it's about like they saw it's almost like you saw the one problem, but you need to kind of fix the next problem, or need to kind of keep going upwards instead of just keep going like straight keep going straight really. I got to keep going upwards. So that's how I feel about that. It's Simon Miller's definitely wrong to say, oh, we shouldn't care about it.